français. On va réciter la louange à Manjushri. O chamdende chambe yang la chakse lo gangi lo je jimni chinje nita namda krapse we chinye denkun jishin si chinye ki toka legbansin kandak sipe tsenarar marig menton tonge kisi shwe chotso ken la bochi tatse yan la chu yan den sun drogda che drot nyemon yelong le ki cha dro je zi ching marig mense donge nyoko chinye che tse re jinam dene dakjin sa chi tasen yenten Lütso kiesi to worku Chutrak chutan chunyi gentre dalu minse chambe yanla tu tseten keki kenara peser ki dalu timok Parapsene katang tenche jonglok tokpa yi lodre pope non watsa tu so.
We'll pick up where we left off yesterday and go over the outline. We are working on chapter 2, which covers the faculties more precisely in the second main part of this chapter, which concerns the mode of birth of conditioned phenomena. Concerning this section, we are looking at the mode of birth of non-material phenomena, concerning the detailed explanation, which itself concerns two parts. We're looking at the first of these two, the detailed explanation of phenomena that are associated by similarity with mind. In other words, conditioning phenomena associated by similarity with mind. Over the next few days, we will look at the conditioning phenomena non-associated by similarity with mind. Within these explanations, there are 4 subparts, as was said yesterday. The classification of the 5 great bases has been covered. And we're looking at the second subsection, which sovereign minds are present around, which mental events are present around which sovereign mind. There are 4 subsections to this. Yesterday we looked at the first one, which mental events are present. Before this, there's a subdivision into the desire realm and the higher realms, which mental events are present around which sovereign mind. Yesterday we looked at which mental events are present around a virtuous sovereign mind in the desire realm, and then we started looking at which mental events are present around a non-virtuous sovereign mind in the desire realm. The explanations continue a little bit further, so we'll continue with that, which is probably beneficial since it's a bit complicated. We'll start again with the root text. Stanza 29, lines 2 to 4, and the first line of stanza 30. Around a non-virtuous sovereign mind, when this last is associated with dissociated ignorance, or the last 3 views, 20 mental events appear. When it is associated with 4 afflictive obscurations, aggressiveness, etc., or with regret, 21 mental events appear. So we find 2 cases, 20 mental events, or 21. The first case was explained yesterday, but we'll come back to it or go over it again. So we'll first go through the case in which there are 21, and then Khelzang Puntso recaps everything. So first, the explanation concerning 21 mental events. How many mental events are present around a non-virtuous sovereign mind? So to begin with, we hear sovereign mind, and therefore, with a sovereign mind, we know that there's always the first group, the great basis of mental events that accompany all sovereign minds, thus 10 mental events. And then there's the term non-virtuous. We know that around every non-virtuous sovereign mind we find the great basis of mental events that accompany non-virtuous sovereign mind, which includes 2 mental events: absence of esteem and absence of consideration. Previously, absence of esteem was translated as absence of respect. In any case, that brings us to 12. In this case, this concerns the desire realm. In the desire realm, the 2 mental events of course examination and subtle analysis are always present. 12 plus 2 brings us to 14. So now we'll look at a case of a sovereign mind that is associated with one of the 4 afflictions, as stated in the text, one of the 4 afflictive obscurations: desire, attachment, aversion, pride, or doubt. The sovereign mind that we're looking at is associated with one of these 4. As it is associated with an afflictive obscuration, it is therefore an afflicted sovereign mind. Therefore, we find these 6 mental events that make up the great basis of an afflicted sovereign mind, which therefore also accompanies this non-virtuous sovereign mind. So we add the 6 mental events of the great basis of afflicted sovereign mind. We were at 14. We add 6. That brings us to 20 mental events. As it was just said, this is a case where the sovereign mind here is associated with one of the 4 afflictive obscurations, either desire, attachment, aversion, pride, or doubt. Thus, we need to also add the afflictive obscuration that is present. If it's associated with desire attachment, then it's necessary to add desire attachment. We were at 20, so then we add 1. And that brings us to 21 mental events around this non-virtuous sovereign mind of the desire realm. So that was the remaining short explanation, and then Khelzang Puntso goes over this explanation quickly again, first looking at 20, then 21. So the first case as we looked at in the root text, this is sovereign mind associated with either unmixed ignorance or one of the last 3 views. This unmixed ignorance or these three views will be associated with a non-virtuous sovereign mind. Around this non-virtuous sovereign mind, there are 20 mental events. We can list them again. We find the first group, the 10 mental events that accompany all sovereign minds. As it is sovereign mind that is non-virtuous, we find the 2 mental events that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign minds. Because we are in the desire realm, we also find coarse examination and subtle analysis. And lastly, the group of 6 mental events that accompany all afflicted sovereign mind. Because there is either unmixed ignorance or one of the 3 views, which are afflictions. So this is what Khelzang Puntso goes on to clarify. Why are there 20 mental events here and not 21? When sovereign mind is associated with unmixed ignorance, there's no need to count ignorance additionally, because it's already accounted for in the group of 6 mental events that accompany all afflicted minds, sovereign mind. When sovereign mind is associated with one of the last 3 views, it's also not necessary to count the view, because as we recall, views are included in discernment, and discernment itself is part of the first great basis, the 10 mental events that accompany all sovereign mind. In both of these cases, the affliction is already included elsewhere, therefore there's no need to add it. Either in the great basis sovereign mind that accompanies all sovereign minds for the 3 views, or for the group of 6 mental events that accompany afflicted sovereign mind for unmixed ignorance. The 3 views at hand here are view that we're moving on. It's fine, you can look them up. The third is a view that grasps as supreme, an observance or asceticism that does not lead to liberation. In the case of a non-virtuous sovereign mind, why are we talking about these 3 views and not all 5 views? Because, as it was stated, the first 2 views, the views of a whole in destruction, in other words, the view of a self, and the view that grasps extremes, are undefined. Thus, they cannot be associated with non-virtuous sovereign mind, as is the case here. And sovereign mind that we are looking at is a non-virtuous one, and therefore it cannot be associated with mental events that are undefined. In the same way, in the case of non-virtuous sovereign mind, we only no, in this case, when there is unmixed ignorance, as with when one of the three views is present, there are 21 mental events around this non-virtuous sovereign mind. This concerns the first case of 20 mental events around a non-virtuous sovereign mind. In other words, here we don't need to additionally count the three views or unmixed ignorance. Now we come back to the second possibility, in case where ignorance is mixed with another afflictive obscuration. In this case, as we said earlier in this session, we need to add one more mental event to this count of 20, which brings us to 21 mental events. If ignorance mixed with other afflictions is present, how many mental events are present around this sovereign mind? There are 20 plus 1, 21. Mixed ignorance is only associated with one afflictive obscuration at a time, therefore we only need to add one. Khelzang Puntso clarifies that there are various mixed ignorances. Ignorance mixed with desire, attachment, ignorance mixed with aversion, pride, etc. If we come back to the root text, we can see that it only cites the 4 root afflictive aversions, afflictive obscurations, such as desire, attachment, and aversion. However, this can also apply to the 10 minor afflictions. This concludes the second case of a non-virtuous sovereign mind in the desire realm, which is the most complicated one. Now we come to the third subpart, mental events around an undefined sovereign mind. There are 2 subsections here. The mental events around an undefined sovereign mind that hinders liberation, and the mental events around an undefined a sovereign mind that is undefined, not hindering liberation. These are the third and fourth cases. We'll start looking at, in any case, we will focus on the mental events around an undefined sovereign mind. The third case concerns an undefined sovereign mind which hinders liberation. The fourth case is undefined sovereign mind that does not hinder liberation. Around an undefined sovereign mind that hinders liberation. Here, the root text says, stanza 30, line 2, around an undefined sovereign mind hindering liberation, 18 mental events are present. First, let's talk about what is at hand here. Undefined hindering liberation. This concerns the first two views. As we stated yesterday, the view of a whole in destruction and the view of extremes, as well as ignorance mixed with these two views. These three things, in the case of the desire realm, refer to what is undefined, hindering liberation. We're talking about the first two views and ignorance mixed with these two views. In the desire realm, these two things refer to what is undefined, hindering liberation. Due to being mental events, these three will be concomitant with consciousness, with sovereign mind. Due to this, sovereign mind itself will be undefined, hindering liberation. Undefined here means neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Now we'll look at the mental events around this sovereign mind that is undefined, hindering liberation. There are 18 mental events. So first, it's sovereign mind. So there will be the first group that accompanies all sovereign mind, this group of 10. In this case, we're in the desire realm, thus we can add coarse examination and subtle analysis. This brings us to 12. In this case, however, we won't count the group that accompanies non-virtuous sovereign mind, because in this case, the sovereign mind at hand is undefined. Due to the fact that sovereign mind here is associated either with the two views or with ignorance mixed with these two views, and these two views and this ignorance are afflictive obscurations, it's necessary to add the group of 6 mental events that accompany all afflicted sovereign mind. So this brings us from 12 to 18. When there is a sovereign mind that is undefined, hindering liberation, there are 18 mental events, neither more nor less. That was concerning an undefined sovereign mind hindering liberation. Next, we come to the second subpoint, around an undefined sovereign mind not hindering liberation. This brings us to line 3 of stanza 30. Around the other undefined sovereign mind, 12 mental events are accepted. So this is the fourth case, which concerns undefined sovereign mind that does not hinder liberation. This sovereign mind is once again undefined, therefore neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So this concerns thoughts like, I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this. Sovereign mind associated with this kind of thought is said to be undefined and not hindering liberation. It is undefined and does not hinder liberation. In the same way, when we see a neutral object, an object that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, visual consciousness associated with this vision of a neutral object is what we is also undefined, not hindering liberation. These different sovereign minds that accompany this kind of thoughts, like I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this or that, or visual consciousness of a neutral object, are undefined, not hindering liberation. In this case, around sovereign mind that is undefined, not hindering liberation, there are 12 mental events. Because it is sovereign mind, we find the great basis that accompanies all sovereign mind, the first group of 10. And due to being in the desire realm, it's necessary to add course examination and subtle analysis. We don't have the group of mental events accompanying all non-virtuous sovereign mind, because this sovereign mind is undefined. The same is true for the mental events accompanying all afflicted sovereign mind. This concludes this section on the mental events accompanying a sovereign mind that is undefined. We'll take a short silent break now. To conclude this subsection on which mental events are present around a sovereign mind of the desire realm, there is a fourth point, which is a clarification concerning sleep. And here the text in stanza 30, line 4 and stanza 31, line 1 says, because sleep is not incompatible with any type of sovereign mind, when it is present, it must be added. This is simply what the text says. Sleep is not incompatible with any mental event. Thus, when sleep is present, it must be added. It can be added to a virtuous sovereign mind. This mental event of sleep can be added to a virtuous sovereign mind, a non-virtuous sovereign mind, an afflicted sovereign mind, etc., when it is present. Khelzang Puntso states it's like regret, which can also be added. Nevertheless, there is a difference between the mental events of sleep and regret. Regret can be associated with virtuous sovereign mind and non-virtuous sovereign mind. Sleep can be associated with virtuous sovereign mind, non-virtuous sovereign mind, and undefined sovereign mind. Khelzang Puntso draws a parallel between regret and sleep in that they can be added, but there is a difference, which is that regret can only be associated with virtuous and non-virtuous sovereign minds, while sleep can be associated with virtuous, non-virtuous, or undefined sovereign minds. That's it for this point. It's just a quick point of clarification concerning sleep. So now we've covered the 4 possible cases in the desire realm. Virtuous sovereign mind, which mental events are present in this case, or the case when sovereign mind is non-virtuous, the case when sovereign mind is undefined, hindering liberation, or the case when sovereign mind is undefined, not hindering liberation. That was concerning the desire realm. Now we will look at which mental events are present in the higher realms. You'll see in your outline that the next section is entitled, Which Mental Events Are Present in the Higher Realms? There are 2 parts. The mental events present on the first dhyana and the mental events present on the second dhyana and above. The term dhyana here also corresponds to the meditative absorptions. Before going into these sections with the root text and the commentary that Khelzang Puntso gave, Khelzang Puntso himself gave a short introduction, which we'll share here, where he tells us that in the 2 higher realms, the form and the formless realm, there are always 12 mental events that are absent. In the 2 higher realms, 3 out of the 8 undetermined mental events are absent: regret, sleep, and aversion. Regret, sleep, and aversion. As there is no non-virtue in the higher realms, the 2 mental events that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign mind are also absent. The absence of esteem and absence of consideration. They are also not present in the 2 higher realms. So that's 3 plus 2 that are not present. Furthermore, 7 out of the 10 mental events in the group of minor afflictive obscurations are absent. So these 7 are the 7 remaining if we don't count evasive dissimulation, duplicity, trickery. I don't remember how to translate these things. Duplicity, deceit, and not self-sufficiency, what is it called? Self-centeredness. So there are 10 minor afflictive obscurations. The way that Khelzang Puntso expressed this explanation is that there are 7 absent in the higher realms, and these 3 are the ones that are still present: duplicity, deceit, and self-centeredness. Those are the 3 that, out of the 10 minor afflictive obscurations, which are present in the higher realms, those that are absent from the higher realms are the 7 others, which are aggressiveness, resentment, jealousy, meanness, direct dissimulation. Greed and violence or ill will. If we say this all again, in the higher realms, there are 12 mental events that are always absent. 3 out of the 8 undetermined mental events: regret, sleep, and aversion. Additionally, the 2 that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign mind: absence of esteem and absence of consideration. And 7 out of the 10 minor afflictive obscurations. The 7 that are missing are aggressiveness, resentment, jealousy, meanness, trickery, greed, and violence, or ill will, depending on the translation. these 12 that we just listed are always absent from the higher realms. Khelzang Puntso explains this before going into the root text itself. Another information that he gives is that there is a particularity concerning course examination and subtle analysis. Course examination and subtle analysis are absent starting from the second meditative absorption of the form realm. Starting from the second meditative absorption of the form realm and all the way up through the peak of existence, course examination and subtle analysis are absent. To give a bit more detail, we saw that the first meditative absorption of the form realm is divided into the basic level and the higher level. In the basic level or stage of the first meditative absorption, course examination and subtle analysis are present. In the higher stage of the first meditative absorption, there is no longer course examination, but subtle analysis remains. To sum things up, course examination is absent starting from the higher stage of the first meditative absorption of the form realm, and subtle analysis is absent starting from the second meditative absorption of the form realm. The root text will explain this, so we'll go over it again quite soon. In total, the mental events that are absent from the higher realms are those that we have just covered. The first 12 that we listed, plus course examination and subtle analysis, taking into account the details that were just explained. Here, Khelzang Puntso adds, there's no need to panic. Everything that was just explained will be re-explained in regards to the root text. Khelzang Puntso adds that it's important to know which mental events are absent in each of the realms of samsara, because when we count up the different mental events present around a sovereign mind, then we'll know which are absent and which are present. That was the introduction. Now we begin the point itself. You have all of the different elements. It'll be easier. We'll begin with the mental events present on the first dhyana. There are two subsections. The mental events present on the first dhyana in and of itself as a basis, and the mental events present on the first dhyana in and of itself, the higher one. Let's begin with the mental events present on the first dhyana in and of itself as a basis. This we find in stanza 31, lines 2 and 3. The root text says, "In relation to what precedes, regret, sleep, and non-virtuous sovereign mind are not present in the two stages of the first dhyana." Here we'll focus on the mental events that are present in the first meditative absorption, as the title indicates. Here we find neither regret, nor sleep, nor all that is non-virtuous. These are absent from the higher realms. That's it for this first subsection. Now we come to the second subsection, mental events present on the first dhyana in and of itself, the higher one. Here the root text is line 4 of stanza 31. In the higher stage of the first dhyana, course examination is also missing. In the higher stage of the first meditative absorption, course examination will also be missing. So now we've looked at the lower or basic and higher level of the first dhyana. Now we'll look at the second dhyana, the mental events present on the second dhyana and above. We find this in the root text, stanza 32, line 1. Above, subtle analysis is also missing. Starting from the second meditative absorption, subtle analysis will also be missing. If we recap this section, which mental events are present in the higher realm, Khelzang Puntso told us, the most important to know is that starting from the first meditative absorption and up through the peak of existence, 12 mental events are always absent. So here he lists them again. These three from the undetermined mental events: aversion, regret, and sleep. The two that accompany all non-virtuous sovereign mind, absence of esteem and absence of consideration, and the 7 out of 10 that are in the group of mental events accompanying all sovereign mind of minor afflictions: aggressiveness, resentment, meanness, jealousy, greed, ill will, and trickery. In all, this makes 12 that are always absent from the first meditative absorption up through the peak of existence. We saw that in total there are 46 mental events. 12 are absent here, therefore 34 remain. If we go into more detail, in the base level of the first meditative absorption, all 34 are present. In the higher stage of the first meditative absorption, course examination is not present, thus there are 33. And from the second meditative absorption up through the peak of existence, subtle analysis is also not present, thus there are 32. That covers mental events in the higher realms. Let's take another short break. What have we just covered? We looked at how many mental events are present in the desire realm around a sovereign mind. We looked at 4 cases: the case of a virtuous sovereign mind, non-virtuous sovereign mind, undefined hindering liberation, and undefined not hindering liberation. We also looked at how many mental events are present around a sovereign mind in the 2 higher realms. Maybe it's more precise to say which ones are absent in the form and the formless realm. Now we come to a part where we will analyze the mental events that seem similar but which are different. This is the section titled "The Differences Between Similar Mental Events." And we will compare two mental events in each case and try to determine their differences. There are 4 subparts. The difference between absence of esteem and absence of consideration. The difference between appreciation and respect. And the third, the difference between coarse examination and subtle analysis. And fourth, the difference between pride and self-centeredness. So these are duos of mental events that are similar. We'll determine the differences here. We'll begin with the first duo in the section, the difference between the absence of esteem and absence of consideration. Here in stanza 32, lines 2 and 3, the root text says, lack of regard is absence of respect. Absence of consideration is lack of regard is absence of esteem. Sorry, this translation is not up to date. Lack of respect is absence of esteem. That's the current translation. Absence of consideration is not seeing the danger of harmful acts. Once again, lack of respect is absence of esteem. Absence of consideration is not seeing the danger of harmful acts. So here we will look at the Vaibhashika point of view first, and then that of the Sautrantika, which is slightly different. We'll begin with the Vaibhashika point of view, based on which the absence of esteem, previously absence of respect. Absence of esteem is not having respect for the qualities and for those endowed with qualities. No respect for the qualities or for those endowed with qualities. For example, when we talk about qualities, this can refer to the qualities of the Buddha. The Buddha is characterized by 2 main qualities. First, perfect abandonment of all that is to be abandoned. Second, perfect realization of all that is to be understood. Perfect abandonment and perfect realization when we speak of a Buddha. When we talk about one endowed with qualities, in this case, this refers to the Buddha himself. In this case, absence of esteem is not having respect for the qualities of perfect abandonment and perfect realization. And likewise, not having respect for the Buddha himself. This is what we call absence of esteem from the Vaibhashika point of view. Here, Khelzang Puntso clarifies absence of esteem in the context of the world has a different meaning. This is also not having respect for one's elders. In the world, the term ngutsa, which is translated here as esteem, refers to a kind of discomfort or shame. For example, if I have a big belly and I'm a little ashamed, or if I have a tooth that sticks out and when I laugh I'm a little embarrassed and I hide it. In the world, this is the meaning of this word, but in the context of the teaching, this is not what is at hand. Here, absence of esteem is not having respect. Not respecting the qualities or those endowed with qualities. That was covering absence of esteem, and then we'll continue with the absence of consideration from the Vaibhashika point of view. Absence of consideration is not fearing non-virtuous dharmas and not fearing their unpleasant karmic ripening. Once again, not fearing non-virtuous dharmas and their unpleasant karmic ripening. In other words, this refers to not taking care and thinking, what does it matter? This was the Vaibhashika point of view on absence of esteem and absence of consideration. The Sautrantika don't contradict this opinion, however, they propose another definition. So, in this case, we'll talk about the opposites of these absences. In other words, we'll talk about respect and consideration. If there are things that aren't clear, we can always go over it again with questions. In any case, the first term is self-respect. This is refraining from carrying out harmful actions due to the concern we have for ourselves. For example, when we may be about to carry out a harmful action, we'll say to ourselves, I better not do this. If I carry out this action, this goes against the Dharma. In this case, this is about our perspective in terms of ourself. And the next is consideration for others, again, from the Sautrantika point of view. So in this case, it is refraining from carrying out harmful actions. Again, however, in this case, it is in terms of the perspective that others may have of us. Consideration for others is in relation to others. For example, we might say, someone might see me doing this harmful action and have a poor opinion of me or of the Buddhist teaching. And so we refrain due to others' view. So these two definitions of self-respect and consideration for others are the definitions that we find in the Kejuk, with slightly different translations, but in Tibetan. They're the same terms. Next, we come to the second differentiation, the difference between appreciation and respect. There are two subsections: the difference in and of itself, and which domains are they present in. The difference in and of itself we find in stanza 32, line 4. Appreciation is confidence. Having regard, updated translation. Having respect is esteem. This second comparison is okay, we're not talking about esteem, which was a different event, mental event that we just referred to. Now we're talking about respect. So we're talking about appreciation and respect. Appreciation refers to confidence or trust, having confidence in something. Respect is having esteem for something, holding something in high esteem. Respect is holding the qualities and those endowed with qualities in high regard. This is, of course, the opposite of absence of esteem. Khelzang Puntso warns us about being confused about the use of the word appreciation. He points out that all of the uses of appreciation in the world do not refer to confidence, but in this specific case, when we use appreciation, this refers to confidence or trust. But in general, appreciation is not necessarily confidence. There are cases where there can be appreciation, but not confidence. We can consider the example of the relationship of a parent to their child. Though the child has no particular qualities, there is appreciation. But there is no confidence in higher qualities of a child. In this case, the relationship of a parent with their child, there is appreciation. Parents love their children, though they have no higher qualities, and thus there is no confidence. So this is in relation to a worldly meaning of the term appreciation. Then there are cases where there is confidence but not appreciation. For example, when we understand the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering, in this case there is confidence, But there's no appreciation in the worldly sense in terms of liking something. When we see suffering, of course, it's not something that we appreciate. Nevertheless, there is confidence. We say to ourselves, indeed, all conditioned phenomena are suffering. That's the second case, where there is confidence but no appreciation. And then there can be a third case where there is both appreciation and confidence. For example, when we see the qualities of our Lama, then we experience both appreciation and confidence. Both are present. Another example is when we understand the truths of cessation and of the path. We feel appreciation. We experience appreciation when we see that this is a path that leads to liberation, and we also have confidence in this path. Why are we giving all of these examples? Because it's important not to be confused, to properly distinguish appreciation to be aware of the difference between liking something and having confidence in something. Confidence can include appreciation, but it's not necessarily liking something. Just as we saw with the truth of suffering, we have confidence in this, but we don't like suffering. There's no appreciation for it. We just realized that there was a mix-up. It's not that all conditioned phenomena are suffering. It's rather that all phenomena associated with factors for descent are suffering. This was in relation to the fact that in terms of the truth of suffering, anyway, there's a slight mistake in the text. In any case, Khelzang Puntso explains that respect, the nature of respect is that of appreciation. But when the text says appreciation is confidence, it's important not to understand appreciation in terms of its worldly meaning of liking something. Here, the appreciation that we're talking about here has a specific meaning. It's not just liking something in the usual sense of the term. The text doesn't say that liking something is trusting it. There's another meaning to appreciation that is evoked here. In relation to the truth of suffering, there is a kind of appreciation in the sense that we can trust in it. We have confidence in this, but we don't like suffering. This concludes the short explanation about appreciation is confidence. And next we come to the explanation on the difference between appreciation and respect. Here, Khelzang Puntso gave 2 examples to understand how to distinguish between them. He began by explaining that if there's someone that we don't like, we can see that they have qualities, but we don't like them. We don't appreciate them, even if we can respect their qualities. He gives an example where there is no appreciation but respect. We can consider the example of Pakistan and India regarding cricket. The Indians don't like the Pakistani people, but they recognize that they're good at cricket, and they respect them for this. They accept their qualities, they have respect for their qualities, for being good at cricket, but they don't appreciate them. So that's an example where there's no appreciation, but there's respect. Yeah, this is the worldly meaning of appreciation here. Appreciation is having confidence, and respect is accepting the qualities. There's another example. No. Before that, he says it's possible to have respect, but to not have confidence or appreciation. And then there's another example where there is appreciation but no respect. He says, on the other hand, if we consider our father, but he doesn't really have any qualities, we could imagine somebody who isn't responsible, who is a drinker. In this case, there's no respect for the person's qualities, but there is appreciation because it's our dad in this example. This concludes the point on the difference in and of itself, which is a subpoint or concerning the difference between appreciation and respect. We have 10 minutes for questions. I don't know if we talked about this yet or not. In the first 2 stages of the first meditative absorption, in the second one in the second one there's no longer course examination, but there is subtle analysis. If I understood correctly, course examination would be to say this is a bowl, and subtle analysis would be to see the characteristics of the bowl. In the case of this second stage of the first meditative absorption, that means that I'll still see the characteristics of the bowl, but I won't recognize that it's a bowl. How can I understand that? didn't get any examples at this point in the explanations. What Sylvestre said is that in a meditative absorption, beings are focused on meditative absorption. They're not interested in other phenomena. And therefore, at this point, they don't need course examination. I'll admit it's not a point that's very clear to me. Okay, I can imagine that they're focused on meditative absorption, but it's said that subtle analysis is still present, and I have a hard time imagining it. We didn't get an example, so we can't explain much more, but the point that Sylvestre brings up, it's the form realm. We can't reason the same way that we reason in terms of the desire realm. Here, we're completely preoccupied with sense objects, so a bowl or whatever else. But the form realm is very different. They're not at all focused on sense objects. So what are they focused on, and how can course examination disappear and subtle analysis still be present? It'll probably come later. If their analysis isn't focused on objects, then if I'm not concerned by objects, but I'm in meditative absorption, but then subtle analysis is present, but not like in our world, how does that work? But then also, further on, subtle analysis itself is gone. The next point is the difference between course examination and subtle analysis. We'll talk about it a little tomorrow. That'll give a few more elements. And of course, there are also more aspects that come up in the following chapters. I have a question that might seem a bit far-fetched, but with the teaching of the Abhidharma, I have a bit of a hard time. I find it a little bit scholastic and repetitive. It's not that I don't understand, but I can't really get into it. Am I missing something that I'm not connecting the Abhidharma to the rest? Do you mean Abhidharma in terms of this explanation, the Abhidharmakosha, or also the Kechuk? Yeah, it's the same. I mean, the Kechuk seems more approachable to start. That's also partly why we studied it first. The Abhidharmakosha really goes into the details, particularly with the particularities of the Vaibhashika view, which is maybe a bit peculiar for us. But if the Kechuk's not really better? Not really. It's that I have a hard time bringing life to these teachings. Maybe it comes from me. It's not lively. I think it's normal. It's a process that takes time, and right now we're, in terms of the 3 trainings, we're in the stage of listening, and our work following this is the work of reflection and seeing how does this concern us? How is what the Buddha explained our own mind? And so there's a link to be made between what's explained intellectually here and the living aspect of seeing what our own mind is. And that takes time. We haven't had this perspective since our youth. Just to say that your question is very relevant, in my opinion. It can be a subject that remains intellectual. In the part about undefined sovereign mind not hindering liberation, is there a reasoning or a way of thinking about the fact that the thought I'm going here or there doesn't hinder liberation, or is it just a classification that's given? When we talk about an element that is undefined, not hindering liberation, undefined, hindering liberation, we saw that the elements that are undefined and hindering liberation are a view of a self, a view that grasps extremes, and ignorance mixed with these two views. And we can clearly see that these hinder liberation, but we can also see that an arhat, a noble being, can have the thought, I'm going here, I'm going there, and they are liberated. So once again, we're talking about what isn't hindering liberation. Yeah, it's the thought that I'm going here or there isn't hindering liberation. It's possible to be a noble being and have this type of thought. I'd like to come back to the question about subtle analysis. Is it not simply because we're in this point concerning the mode of birth of immaterial phenomena? Is that why it's difficult to understand why there is the absence of course examination? Is it not just because we're looking at the mode of birth of immaterial phenomena? But in terms of the example of a bowl, course examination in relation to the example of a bowl. When we're talking about immaterial phenomena, we're talking about mind, knowledge, phenomena that are sovereign mind, mental events. We'll also look at conditioning phenomena not associated by similarity with mind. This allows, nevertheless, for knowing a bowl or sense objects as well as mental objects. It's not separate from these objects that are known in the desire realm. But in the form realm, the mind is focused on other objects, is focused on one point. In fact, that's the main difference that we can see there. Short question. Can you remind us of the difference between a non-virtuous mind and an afflicted mind? It's something that was developed in detail in October. We won't be able to give a short answer in just a minute here, but we can talk it over and bring an answer tomorrow. Naturally, we would associate afflicted, but we can see that that's not the case here. We'll conclude and dedicate. We'll take more time for questions tomorrow. The day after tomorrow.
Merci.